I think we all share anxiety over thinking about disasters, and it's pretty overwhelming to think about how to even begin preparing. But there are a lot of resources out there, and I'm going to provide you with a bunch of these at the end of this presentation that will help walk you through the process. And you can take a look at where you are personally and see where maybe there are some gaps or holes that need to be filled. There are always options to reach out to us for questions or concerns or ideas. And I just want to say that in a disaster, everybody is under a huge amount of stress. It's just a given that thinking clearly goes out the window a lot of times. So the more you can do to prepare in advance and the more you can have in place with a plan, the better things will go. And it just kind of makes it easier when you're really under that stress to say, hey, I've got a plan and I know here's what I'm going to do. And here are the people that are going to help me. So we want to just walk through some options here today. And also, first, kind of early on here, I'm going to have Loren talk more about what the community is doing to help all of us prepare and make it easier for everybody in the long run. So here's what we're going to talk about today, briefly. What can go wrong, planning for disasters, and how the city is preparing, some of the community partnerships that are involved. And we'll talk about some of the Bainbridge Repairs and city teams that are working on this effort. And then, you know, getting your supplies together, what kind of things do you need to think about having? Special considerations for seniors, and how to be informed, how to get information when you need it. And then some of the resources. And we have actual hard copies of a lot of these, but then we can also provide more if you need them. So with that, let's talk about some of the things that can go wrong. We've talked about earthquakes. You know, that's the big one we think about here. Landslides are another one that, especially when we've had tons of rain like we have lately, that can be an issue. Let's see here. Wildfire, as Loren mentioned, and we've never really given that much thought, but when you think about it, we're on an island without a lot of ways to easily get off the island in an emergency. So we do have to think about preparing for things like that, especially with the hotter summers we've had. Tsunami, seiches they're basically like a standing wave within a more confined area. That's less of a concern right here. One of the things you have seen in the last week, especially, are severe wind and rain events that happen around here frequently in the winter. And then also, well, we call it snowmageddon. We've had a couple of those where just torrential or, you know, heavy snowstorms that come on suddenly and kind of freeze the whole island. And then last but not least, the global pandemic. And here's a good example of how preparing in advance can make a huge difference. Nobody really expected when we started working with Bambers Repairs that this is something we'd be dealing with. And we already had most of the teams in place. And this allowed us, and I'll let Loren talk a little bit more about that, but allowed Bambers Repairs to very quickly stand up a response to the pandemic and assist in the vaccination clinics. And if we hadn't had Bambers Repairs and, you know, had this partnership with the city and the fire department and the police department and the community pharmacy, this just would not have been possible to do that quickly. And that's one of the reasons I think we were able to get such a large number of people, and especially seniors on the island, vaccinated very quickly. So that was a really positive thing. Planning is where it's at. As I said before, the more you have planned, the more you have in place, the less anxiety and stress and the better situation you're going to have when it comes down to it. This includes a family disaster plan. If you have family or friends that can check in on you, a reunification plan, meaning outside of your home, if you have to leave your home or in a disaster, so that you can gather and people will know where to find you. And that could be, you know, someplace in the community. It could be, if you live in a facility, it could be like a community area that you can meet at. And emergency contact list, especially an out-of-state contact, because in a disaster, a lot of times phone lines are overwhelmed. And if the phone lines are down in our area, having an out-of-state contact that's not affected by the disaster can be really important. And then neighborhood plan. If you haven't done Map Your Neighborhood or you don't know about it, it's a fantastic program where your neighbors, up to I think about 20, gather together and all assess what kind of resources you have, what challenges you have in the neighborhood, people that need to be checked in on, things that you as a community, as a neighborhood, can share to help support each other and look out for each other. So that's another thing that's available to us here.
Rita, I'm gonna you mind if I jump in here?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Put that slide back up. So
yeah,
one other disaster that well, has affected so many of us is just kind of the local emergencies. You know, your spouse has is going into cardiac arrest, or has broken, broken their hip. So, you know, I would say, don't just think about, ooh, what do I do if a big earthquake hits? It's like, oh, what do I do if I'm starting to have a heart attack? Or, I can give you an example, a few examples on my street. Just in the last 2 years, it's only about 30 houses, but we've had 2 individuals pass away. One somewhat unexpectedly, one very unexpectedly in his early 50s. And then another individual in his early 40s had a stroke, and his family, found him on the kitchen floor, on a Sunday morning. But the whole neighborhood, because I kind of use my neighborhood as an example of sort of the neighborhood plan, we all came together through each of these, and we were immediately able to go in and take care of the kids and help the families and everything. And so it was just all that preparing we did beforehand, just getting to know each other was just, huge. And so I actually, as good as family and friends are, many of them are far away. I mean, how many people have close family that live on the island? Okay, maybe 2 of you. The rest of us, my family doesn't have any other immediate family that lives nearby, and so we have to rely on our neighbors. If we have to my wife and I have to go to the hospital, who can take care of our kids quickly at a moment's notice? Oh, our neighbors right there. They're trusted. Kids go over there. So, I'll talk about the related to reunification plan. It's it's one of those things where just put on your hat and say, what really makes sense? So for my family, we were trying to make it kind of complicated at first. And then we thought and said, you know what, if there's a fire at our house or whatever, or there's a tree down and we can't get to our house, we know we can get to the neighbor's house two houses down that's earlier in the street. So there's just a lot, we are all likely to be able to, find each other closer to the entrance of the street than we would at the community center, across the way. It's just like, be realistic about, where would we naturally think about meeting each other if we couldn't meet at home? So, yeah, that just kind of gets into the reunification plan thinking. So. Right.
Good point.
All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Rita.
Oh, okay. Well, and jump in anywhere, please, Loren.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just giving you kind of a little overview of what the city is doing to help prepare. They're working on their staff preparedness, emergency operations center readiness, the comprehensive emergency management plan, emergency management advisory committee, and the partnerships with the fire department and Bambers Repairs, and really they've done a ton to focus on community preparedness in the last couple of years here, especially. So just know that there are a lot of people at the city that are working on this as well.
But I will say it's actually a very hard problem. So I'll give you some numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So from a professional city perspective, let's just throw out on a random Tuesday morning at 2 a.m. How many police officers are on duty on the island? Take a guess.
3.
2. And if there's an individual that needs to be taken, into custody and taken to jail, where's our jail?
Port Orchard.
Port Orchard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one and how long does it take to get to Port Orchard? And it's one of those things where so that one of those officers has to go off island, take an hour out, takes an hour to process an individual to jail, and then an hour back. So we've got one off in a scenario like that. We have one police officer that has to cover 25,000 individuals on the island. Yes, sir.
But I get past bridges down.
Oh, absolutely. No, so 100%. That's another thing that we've been thinking about. And so many of our other city employees, and it's becoming a more and more of an issue, can't afford to live on the island. And so they have to live in Poulsbo and Silverdale. And so that's been a big concern of ours. Another statistic I throw out there is, how old is our bridge?
Gosh, 51 is when it went in.
Yes. So it's 70 years old. And it has been deemed functionally obsolete. Doesn't mean it's unsafe. It just means that there's no way that if it was built for 1950s levels of service, when you had a couple of pickups, driving with their produce off the island every day, not for the level of traffic that it's currently experiencing. So
is there a plan now?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you're thinking about it, what kind of plan is this?
well, so there's a couple segments of this. There's the Washington State Department of Transportation, that's their bridge. And it is on a list for consideration for replacement, but it's actually not on a high priority list. Like, it's one of those things where hopefully in the next 10 years, we will come up with a plan to replace it. But that's 10 years or so. So there's that. In terms of other things, it's like, okay, what happens if it's, maybe not collapsed or whatever, but it's deemed unsafe after a major event and it's out of commission for, a week or two? How do we get things on and off the island? Especially now, given how unreliable our ferry service is.
Right.
And so that's been a big consideration of ours, and especially because a lot of those ferry employees have to commute again from Poulsbo over the bridge to get to, their shift that starts at 4 a.m. On the ferries. How do we get them there? How do we get all those police officers that live on Poulsbo onto the island?
Yeah.
So it's a big worry. We don't have a formal plan for that right now. It's one where we're working on building a flotilla of civilian boats to essentially shuttle individuals back and forth. But that's another major effort that it's like, ooh, how do we coordinate all that? And
But that would seem to be essential, that particular
a route.
solution. Finding that flotilla should be very high priority.
Yes, there's a lot of high priority work. And so, but that is one of the top things for consideration, yes.
Well, and it's being organized, right?
Oh, absolutely. We've made more progress on the flotilla this year than we have in the last 9.
Where is it from? From where the bridge would span?
So it's one of those things, there's considerations of a couple of points where people and supplies need to get from place to place. So the closest would be the Suquamish
Dock?
the Suquamish dock, Suquamish boat ramp, And then to, you know, kind of the nearest place that you can get people onto the island in a large way, which would be Hidden Cove, the marinas up there. But then there's all sorts of other marinas that we are, you know, trying to establish relationships with, you know, Browns Point. Yes, sir.
How ironic it is that we have to be dependent on the tribes, the land we stole.
No, we have luckily, we do have a very good relationship with Suquamish. Rita, can you go back one slide,
Sure.
I think?
Yep, there you go.
So one of the committees that we have, this one, the EMAC committee, meets every 6 months, and it includes members of the tribe, members of Washington State Department of Transportation, their emergency management department that relies, you know, kind of partners with us to make sure their ferry workers can get to the, you know, to the ferries, and various other entities in the county to essentially say, like, okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to do if the bridge is down, or what, you know, or something else bad happens? So it's something that's actively being worked on.
Well, I mean, even getting gasoline for our cars.
Yep. So, you know, an example of that is, for a while, the Chevron did not have a generator. So they could have 3 days worth of fuel in their underground tanks, but if they didn't have a way to power those pumps, that fuel's just sitting there. And so it's one of those things where we checked in on them a couple of weeks ago. They didn't have a generator 3 years ago. They do now, so at least they can, you know, get the fuel out. We haven't yet had strong conversations with 76, the other gas station on the island, but we plan to. But yes, these are all the considerations. It's like, what are all the things that need to happen?
It's the
Right.
supply.
Yep.
Yeah, and you personally, that brings up another thing to talk about, is just the thought that there's a reason why they say keep your gas tank at least half full all the time, because if you're down to near zero and we do have a disaster where the pumps are down for a time, you know, you're going to want to have some gas on hand, just in order to get yourself anywhere, or even if you're stuck in your car and you need to run the heater for a while because it's cold. So that's just a small part of that. But Loren, do you want to talk a little bit about the community partnerships here that you see on this slide?
Sure. So Bambers Repairs is one leg of a three-leg partnership. So essentially, it is the NGO, the nonprofit arm of the partnership. The city of Bainbridge Island, for which the police department reports to, is the governmental arm, and then the fire department is a separate entity for our community, but it's the third leg of the partnership. And the way we've found that it works is, depending on what needs there are in the community, we can rotate the primary face of that partnership. And so, you know, when we need a disaster to be a disaster response to be activated, or we need to coordinate with the state government, and the city's face is the one that's shown. When, you know, a whole bunch of volunteers want to essentially say, hey, I'd love to help with this or that or whatever, that's when our face, you know, shows. Or, you know, somebody wants to, you know, make a donation of a trailer or a whole bunch of food or whatever, we can present the face. And then when you need somebody to look good in a uniform, that's when the fire department, you know, presents their face, and they have their, you know, professionally trained paramedics and, you know, all of that. So it's worked very, very well. But then when Rita's, you know, had all those bullet points of the community organizations, and this is a small handful.
Yes.
Of all the, I would say it's easier, and I would not that to suggest that we do this, it's easier to show a list of all the community organizations that we don't partner with than we do, because essentially fortunately everyone gets sucked in eventually. And so So Reed and his team here have been wonderful at the Senior Community Center. We've had a relationship with Rita and IBC for many, many years. Same thing with Rotary. Bainbridge Island Community Pharmacy is one from the last, 2 years since the pandemic hit. Didn't have as strong of a partnership with them initially, but then that grew and that developed, and now, boy, we couldn't have done so much without them in the last year. And again, I could rattle off, 36 organizations on the island that we have partnerships with, that just make this a very fulfilling activity.
Yeah.
Well, who rates the bridge in terms of how,
The Washington State Department of Transportation rates the bridge, and they do.
I know they're working on it all the time.
They're working on it all the time. They do the safety inspections. In terms of who declares if it's unsafe and closes it, it is going to be the Washington State Department of Transportation and essentially the Washington State Patrol. And so they're going to be putting, the WSD or the State Patrol cars on either end to basically block it off. But they also have partnerships with the Bainbridge Island Police Department if they need assistance. And then it's going to be their engineers that are going to have to come out, make any repairs, and declare it safe. So.
But if it goes out for some reason, what other systems are going to be alerted immediately?
Oh, well, so they would alert us, our partnerships, especially the city and the fire department. And then the city and the fire department are, blast out to everybody to say, hey, do you remember how many of you have subscribed to Nixle? Okay, the majority of you. The alert, did you get the alert last week where the bridge was shut down? So that was one where the Washington State Department of Transportation alerted us to say, we gotta close the bridge for a period of time. And then that's when we alerted, or our partners alerted the community, yes.
How many first responders live on Bainbridge? It's a small percentage.
It's getting smaller each year, so it's probably 30% or less. And that's fire department and police department. So 60 to 70% live somewhere else.
Right.
And might not be here.
Well, if they're on their shift, they would be here. But then they want to go back home, check on their families, But yes, no, it's a major concern, and that also applies to other things. So we have a number of high-ranking Coast Guard officials that live on the island, for example. They will need to get to the Coast Guard, base in Seattle if something happens. We have actually some Seattle some high-ranking Seattle firefighters that live on the island that work for example, the fireboat right next to the ferry terminal. So all of these people were starting to kind of develop a database to say, okay, you're on our radar now, so that we can coordinate with you if you either need assistance getting on the island or getting off the island because you're needed in another community or another service. So, a lot of moving parts though.
Yes. So again, Loren, I'll let you just briefly, if you want, go over some of the teams that are involved here, because there's a lot of them. Yeah.
All right, I'll just touch briefly on each of them. So I'll start with the Community Emergency Response Team. So the CERT program is not one that we originated. I think it was originated in Los Angeles. But essentially, it's an acknowledgement that in a major event, the first responders are going to be overwhelmed. They're just not enough employed. There's enough employed, well, maybe not today, but in a normal year to satisfy 99 or 98% of the needs of the community. And it's when, for that 1% or 2% times when there's a major issue, either a mass casualty event or a major wildfire or some other issue, when they say, hey, trained volunteers, we need your assistance. We need your, you to come help us. And so we have taken kind of the main CERT, it's called program, and adapted it for Bainbridge Island. we've been activated multiple times. There have been some local search and rescues, an individual, with dementia may leave their house or their apartment, not be seen again for 12 hours or so. Police have done their search, and then they say, hey, we could use some more assistance. And so then they call us, and we get our volunteers activated. So that's just one example of that team. We have the Bainbridge Island Emergency Medical Response Team, which is a lot more training. I'd say the CERT team is maybe 3 or 4 days of training. The medical response team is about 2 weeks. And what we do with them is, so a lot of individuals, that team is designed to provide life-sustaining medical care in situations where real care is an hour or more away. So it could be just across the island, but it's still, because of the scenario, it's just proper care is an hour or more away, either distance-wise or time-wise or what have you. And so these are individuals that have been trained to handle crises, whether it be CPR or broken bones or allergic reactions or what have you, a whole list of other reasons where time is of the essence. You have to treat something within an hour and stabilize the individual until proper care is available.
Well, how do you contact those people?
So a lot of them are essentially contacted again through by the city. An example, and I hate to bring it up, but it's just one of those things where, that's why we're here, we're talking about this, but in a mass casualty event, let's say a mass shooting or a fire, these individuals can, be activated, arrive on scene in, sorry, my mask keeps falling out, arrive on scene in, 15, 20 minutes and help assist paramedics and EMTs that are there to treat wounds and that sort of thing. Yes?
Are these all volunteers?
They are all volunteers, yes. And what we get a lot is individuals that might like to work ski patrol or work out in the actual wilderness. They may go on 2-week-long hiking, trips into the deep, mountains somewhere. And they want to know, like, how can I, help myself or my hiking partners if I know I'm in the middle of nowhere and something bad happens, what can I do? So we get a lot of individuals that are interested in the training because it's actually expensive training, but then assist us as a, reciprocity thing. We talked about the flotilla. I think that's kind of, you guys know enough about that. The Medical Reserve Corps has been probably the fastest growing and most active team in the last 1.5 to 2 years. It is a lot of nurses and doctors and veterinarians that actually have, they basically, years, if not decades of actual medical training. And they are we started with them 2 years ago with about 30 doctors and nurses.
Do they live here or
They live here, they live on the island, and now it's about 230 individuals that live on the island that are part of the Medical Reserve Corps. And so how many of you have we been fortunate enough to give your vaccines to? Read? Okay. So that team is the team that of the vaccinators. Every vaccinator belongs, is on that team because they need to be licensed to provide the vaccines. So big team, more people are joining it every week, and so because just how busy we are. Yes.
What's the connection between Virginia, Mason, Francisco, and the Medical Reserve Corps?
Yeah. So one of
the emergency medical response.
So I'll answer the first question. Well, I guess I'll answer all of it. So one of our main leads on the medical reserve corps team, there's two doctors that lead it. One of them is David Cowan, who's a primary care physician at Virginia Mason Clinic. And a lot of their nurses and doctors, independent of Virginia Mason, volunteer through the medical reserve corps. So Virginia Mason, we talk with them a lot. They don't ever, they infrequently ask us for our assistance. It is more that those nurses and doctors do their day jobs during the week at Virginia Mason and then volunteer with us on the weekends. In terms of emergency medical response is where the fire department really comes in. If you are having a heart attack or some life-threatening event, the fire department are the individuals responding, and then they are going to determine whether or not you just need to go to urgent care for something, in Virginia Mason, or no, we have to get you to Harborview or to Silverdale for the hospital there. And at the end of all this, I'll have a discussion about general medical care on the island, which is another topic that.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'll just talk about the last two really quickly. The ham radio team is really a communications team. Is okay for any team to work properly. They need to be able to communicate with each other. So that team is sort of coordinating the protocols for all of that, and then all of these are really controlled by the Emergency Operations Center, which is myself and Ann Lesage at the city and a few other key individuals that when we activate that team, we work out of City Hall with computers and vests and everything and try to coordinate any team we need to activate out of City Hall.
What happens if the Wi-Fi goes down?
Well, so that's another thing that we so, an example is that's where.
Because there's no way you're gonna be doing anything on a computer.
Well, we do have some capabilities with that, but that's another reason that we have the ham radio team. Those are individuals where we don't need power to get a handheld going and coverage throughout the island. So we've been training with them. And but yes, all these, you're thinking of all the scenarios that.
Maybe it just happened.
Yeah, absolutely. That we need to think about and have plans for. And sometimes we have done enough planning and sometimes we haven't.
I don't know why it still keeps on happening.
Internet outages or power outages?
Well, both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So here's some more teams that are just part of the Bambers Repairs that form the whole organizational structure here. So
our favorite team by far is the Access and Functional Needs team. Their leadership is unparalleled. It's Rita.
We paid him to say that.
Yes, Rita and Reed. I will go into each of these very much. I think the names, speak for themselves, and you can read more about them on our website if you are interested.
Right. Okay, thanks, Loren.
Mm-hmm.
So now, we're talking about, we've talked about the fact that in an emergency, there's a good likelihood that a large number of first responders and just people who live on the island will not be able to be here, whether they're off island working or they live off island, if the bridge goes out, if the ferry dock is damaged for a time. What we need to do is prepare as best we can to be able to take care of ourselves they're telling us that it would be good to be able to take care of ourselves for at least 2 weeks, meaning we can't expect outside help necessarily. If there was a huge disaster that affected the whole area, focus is going to be on major population centers. And so the more we can do to take care of ourselves and each other, the better prepared we will be to weather any kind of disaster. So there's a lot more information about this that we will share, and then I will leave you with at the end. But some of the important things to think about are a go bag, or what's called an evacuation kit. That means if you have to leave your home quickly, what are some things that you need to take with you in order to be able to just take care of yourself in the immediate future? The other thing is if you have a car and or if you work somewhere outside, that would be a place that you need to think about having supplies as well. And then the really important one for a lot of us is the home disaster kit, where you'd want to have enough supplies to take care of yourself for 2 weeks to a month. And it sounds really overwhelming, but as many people have said, preparing, the more you do to prepare, the better. Some preparation is better than zero preparation. So don't be overwhelmed by it. There are great resources to help you get things together, and just doing something will be a step forward.
Rita, I'm gonna touch on the first one really quickly. So, how many folks here have either needed to spend a long time, or more than a few hours in a hospital, or anticipate needing to do that in the next year or so? Okay, possibly, and so it's one of those things where so sometimes sometimes you can plan for that. Oh, I've got surgery coming up, and it's going to be it's going to take a number of hours. But sometimes, you have an incident and you're going to be overnight in a hospital. And so, boy, I sure would have wished I packed some reading glasses. I wish I would have packed charging cables and, for my phone to communicate with folks. Wish I would have packed a change of clothes. And so, that's affected a lot of people nationwide, where they have to get to the hospital immediately and they don't think about that. And they get there and they're like, my phone's about to die. And so think about, like, okay, if I was in the hospital for 2 days, somewhat unexpectedly, what would I wish I had? And so, that can use your basis for, a general go bag that you can just grab without thinking too much about it, or thinking about it too much in the moment, but you've done some thinking, beforehand. And, I'd say go from there for everything else.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about some of the specifics
Okay.
that you might want to include. These are just to think about special considerations. If you have grandchildren, especially, that stay with you, you're going to want to think about things that they might need to have in an emergency. If you have pets, having extra food and a way to take care of your pets. Older family members, or yourself, anybody that has needs that might be over and above what a person who might be younger and doesn't have any needs for, like, assistive devices, and then just anybody who has disabilities or access and functional needs. So here's some things to think about specifically for seniors. If you now take time to really think about what are your personal needs, what are any specific medical conditions you have, any physical disabilities, such as you use a walker or a wheelchair, or you have vision or hearing issues, if you have some memory concerns. Those are all the things that are important to kind of go over in your mind and consider, in an emergency, what would be something that I need to think about for my own care. Developing your plan, and that's going to be not just yourself, but working with family, friends, community support organizations. Just as an example, Island Volunteer Caregivers, works with a lot of people to help them be better prepared or help them with assistance during an emergency. I know they've got a phone tree of volunteers who reach out to people and check in on them after any kind of a disaster might happen. And working with your care providers to see what they concerns they might have for you in an emergency. So it's not done just by yourself. You really can pull in a lot of other assistance to do this. And then think about who those people are that might help you. Do you have a neighbor that might be able to assist you? Do you have friends who are close by? Do you have family in the area or other organizations, you know, that can help support you? And if you live in a community like, you know, if you live in an apartment or you live in an assisted living facility, those are people that you're going to want to reach out to and just find out what kind of plans they might have to assist. I happen to know that like Winslow Arms has a community room where they have put together some emergency supplies for the residents. So talking about those kind of things and finding out what's already in place will be really helpful. And then having a communication plan, you know, how are you going to connect with people? And we'll talk in a little bit about some ways to get information in an emergency, but then also thinking about, you know, who would you reach out to and how. Obviously during a large scale emergency, phones can be an issue. Texting is always easier than putting out a call because, you know, the circuits there are too many people trying to call at once, but texting generally is more effective in those situations. And then thinking about your emergency supplies. That's not just food and water, but looking at an emergency supply of your medications. I went to a training a couple years ago and it was led by a woman from, I think it was Kansas, and they had a huge tornado that had essentially wiped out the entire town. So they didn't have any kind of, you know, they didn't have, the pharmacies were wiped out, everything was wiped out. So having an emergency supply of medications, if you're on critical medications that you can't be without for a time, is really important. And I know that's a big issue for people because a lot of times insurance won't pay for more than, you know, however many days supply. And so sometimes you can refill a prescription about a week early and then have that done a couple times, and then you can have at least a couple of weeks supply. You can talk to your physician or your care provider about ways to do that. And also the pharmacy, I think, can be helpful with that as far as, you know, what you can and can't do as far as refilling medications before you necessarily have gotten through the full 30 days or 90 days or whatever. But it's really important that you not be stuck without medications. And the other thing is, if you use any kind of assistive devices like, you know, glasses, hearing aids, walkers, wheelchairs, canes, having that readily available, not just in your home, but say at nighttime, if you're asleep and the power goes out, or something happens and, you know, an earthquake or whatever, and you have to get up in the middle of the night. You don't want to be stumbling around, you know, trying to find something that's in the other room in the dark. So thinking about having, number one, a light source that's close by, you know, a flashlight, a headlamp, a lantern, you know, an electric lantern, battery powered lantern that you could have close by. Having your hearing aids close by, glasses, and if you need like a walker that you can get up quickly with. And then also just
Rita,
thinking—
I'm gonna just jump in on that last point. So one thing I like to do with certain things that are really important in the middle of the night is I'll put glow in the dark tape around them. So I have this flashlight, for example, on my nightstand, and I have horrible eyesight, you know, and wear contacts, but I can see it if I need to, you know, because it's right there. And so if you have certain things that, or like, you know, furniture that you know you're going to bump into unless you know, see it, you know, just glow in the dark tape is, you know, $10 and it works great.
Can
Yeah,
I
that's,
say one thing?
Yeah.
I've noticed that if you're gonna go to like you're being evacuated, if you have your name on your walker, your name on your glasses,
Perfect.
it's gonna help a lot.
Yep.
yes, exactly. And if you have a spare of anything, you know, it's great. If you have a walker that you generally use around the house and you have an extra one that's close to the exit door that you can grab and take with you if you need it, just, you know, knowing that you have a backup for some of these things. And if you use, for example, if you use kind of a larger wheelchair, if you also have a smaller, more portable one that can be taken in an emergency with you to, say, a hub or a shelter, that's great. And the other thing I would suggest that we often don't think about is, what if there's an earthquake or something and there's a lot of broken glass on the floor?
Yeah.
You get up in the middle of the night and put your feet down and step on glass, it's going to be painful. If you can have a pair of shoes close by your bed where you can slip those on fairly quickly and be able to safely navigate getting out of your bedroom or out of your house if you need to. And just thinking about having things close by that you might need to access in a hurry. Another consideration is, we deal with this a lot in the winter. The power goes out. Do you have an alternate source of heating if it's going to be out for a long time? You know, that's something that can be really dangerous if your body heat drops quickly after an extended period of time without power. And just so you know, one of the things that also is available in emergencies like that is a warming shelter right there at the senior center, which can be activated. And then thinking about, okay, if that happens, how would I get there? So those, you know, there are many parts to all this, but just kind of thinking it through now and getting an idea of what options are available to you. Another thing is, if you are reliant on power for something like oxygen or any other specific medical equipment, CPAP machines, if you need cold to keep your medication cold, how are those things going to happen if you have power outage or a disaster that kind of wipes out the power system for a while? So just things to consider. Another thing that people often forget about is having copies of important documents, your ID card or driver's license, you know, a passport. Really important too is having a list of your medications, because if after an emergency we can't access things like people's medications and they need to get that reconstructed, having that list of all your current medications, it helps to have, if you have any specific medical conditions, have a list of those, who your providers are, who your pharmacy is, you know, all those kinds of things. And the resources that we'll leave you with will have some really good tips on, you know, what's important to include and what to think about. Reed's got a bunch of red packets that he'll give you too that have actual forms in them that you can fill out with that information on it, and then keep with your emergency supplies.
Where are these red packets?
I'll look. Did you say Rita? You said Reed had some of these?
Yeah, we'll hand them out at the end there.
Okay.
So, so here's some things to think about putting in that go bag kit that Loren was talking about. Things like a couple of bottles of water, some snacks, a small first aid kit, flashlight and batteries, copies of really important documents that you want to make sure you have with you if you have to leave, change of clothes and sturdy shoes, some cash, you know, small bills and change, because a lot of times, you know, credit card machines are going to be down, and personal hygiene supplies. I can't tell you how many times I went to the hospital with my mom and, you know, didn't even think about bringing a toothbrush or anything, and you're stuck over there. And so it's nice to have some of those things on hand. And then for car, if you have a car, some things to consider are also things like if you have jumper cables or flares, an ice scraper, things like cat litter, because it can help you with traction. Really important, I think, what I always keep in my car in the winter is a blanket. I don't know how many times I've gotten stuck sitting at the ferry terminal in the winter and it's freezing cold. Having a blanket or sleeping bag with you and a warm jacket is invaluable. And as we mentioned before, like a cell phone charging cable, extra glasses or contacts. If you have a mask, an N95 mask or any mask with you is better than none. And then a light source and things like a whistle. Just a lot of different things to think about there. There's just a little picture of, you want to think about all the things you could cram in there. So how much stuff do you need to keep? What they're saying is it's a good idea to have a gallon of water per person and pet per day. 2 to 4 weeks of non-perishable food. And you think about what would you eat if you didn't have access to necessarily heating something. So that's another consideration. What could you easily eat out of a can or out of a package or whatever? Lights, flashlights, headlamps, extra batteries, a multi-purpose tool, work gloves, NOAA weather radio. I have a great little NOAA weather radio. They're not terribly expensive, and they get you the emergency radio information, as well as you can plug in a cell phone and charge it. Mine cranks to recharge it. It also has batteries. So those are really handy to have if you can do that. If you can have a camp stove or something, you know, a backpacking stove to heat things or boil water. Extra clothes, jacket, sturdy shoes, we talked about that. And then one nice thing, a 5-gallon bucket can be made into a portable toilet if you should need it. And then your key documents and extra prescriptions and all that. So we have, I'm going to hand out, Reed will hand out a great booklet called Prepare in a Year. This has really specific instructions about all the things we've talked about and how to do them and how to spend like an hour a month planning to get yourself prepared. It doesn't mean that you have to go out today and go stock up on everything and do every single thing we've talked about, but just kind of walks you through it. So taking about an hour a month will get you there. One of the other things I want to talk about is getting information. That has been one of the hardest things, I think, with some of the things we've already dealt with, such as the power outages, the snowstorms. A lot of people weren't able to get information as far as what's going on, where do I go, shelters that are open, what's coming up, are there power outages, are there trees down, that kind of thing. And so as we spoke earlier, the Kobe Nixle alerts, if you are able to and you haven't signed up for that, it's a really great way to get information on current things that are happening, such as when the bridge was shut down, when there was a tree over the road, any kind of roads that are closed, accidents. And it's very easy to sign up for, and we can give you that information as far as how to do that. But it's basically, you just text your zip code to 888-777 and you get signed up for Nixle alerts.
Yeah, I want to add that if you don't use texting,
right,
the city has started to roll out phone calls. So if you don't use texting, but you are using a cell phone, like a flip phone or something,
or even a landline,
you can have them call you with a robocall. You know, they'll automatically call and send the message over a voice. And you can register with us or with Island Volunteer Caregivers, and we're giving the names to the city. But they don't want you to be on text and phone. They don't, she just wants people who are not able to get, a text message to be on her phone list. I don't know why.
Right. Yeah, so the other thing that you can sign up for is the Kitsap County alerts. So that's, you know, not just Bainbridge, but all of Kitsap County. And you can go on the Kitsap County website to do that. And then the wireless emergency alert system, that's kind of an automatic. I mean, you don't sign up for that. And then of course, if you're on social media, a lot of times you'll hear some of this via social media information that comes out, but make sure you're using a reliable source, you know, if you're getting that off social media.
What is it called? Kitsap County Alerts or Alert Sense?
If you just go to Kitsap County Alert Sense, it'll bring you right to the website there. And then here, these are some of the tools that will be available for you. As I said, the Red Cross Prepare in a Year. There are 2 different booklets that we have some of, and we can print more. One is called Disaster and Emergency Preparedness for Older Adults, and that's directly through the Red Cross. And then another one also through Red Cross, but that was developed specifically for seniors by seniors and has a lot more detail about some of these issues that you can read through, is called just disaster preparedness for seniors by seniors. And then I also have an emergency preparedness checklist for older adults that we have some copies of, and it just kind of walks you through what to think about and how to think about responding to the different things that you might come up against. And then also Bambers Repairs website, which I've listed here, is a great resource for all kinds of information. I just think, you know, the more you prepare yourself, the less anxiety you will have around any kind of emergency, whether it's a major disaster or, you know, a power outage or a heat issue that you have in the summer, and you need to get to a place where, you know, you get some relief from that. And really relying on people in the community, your friends, your neighbors, looking out for each other. I think we're so fortunate to live on Bainbridge because we have so many people who are really invested in taking care of all of us and each other. So I think that's a really wonderful place to be. I think many communities are far less supported than we are, and I think we're really lucky.